Hi there, my name is Meeta Singh. I am focusing on the Radical Behaviorism for ABA Practitioners book, Chapter 1, Johnston. In this chapter, we really focus on an unavoidable but reasonable assumption. And the chapter really focuses on specifically free will versus determinism. And Johnston brings to light the conversation of inside versus outside, and just external factors versus internalizing factors that help make decisions day by day. So the notion describes that behaviors are created initially from inside of a person. With this perspective, one believes that despite external consequences, reinforcers, etc., the motivation is created initially within a person. In simple terms, we can choose to make choices and decisions and then revisit as we change our minds. So in the book, they talked a lot about lunch options. So do I want a salad or do I want a baked potato for lunch? There's a lot of pieces that go into making that decision. You can think about what you ate for dinner. You can think about if you're sick of potatoes. You could think about, I'm craving ranch today and I could put ranch on my salad. And with all those different pieces that go into that decision, there also is the option to change your initial decision, and that's where free will kind of plays. And the concept of free will in this whole chapter was really addressed as kind of making decisions and having the ability to change it based on your mental stamina and the placement and decision making. While considering free will, it is important to think about choices not being externally driven. So, due to the lack of physical input, free will will focus on mental decision making. So let's consider the concept of what we're going to wear to go to work the next morning, or what I'm going to wear to go hiking on Friday night. I might then allude to bringing back my past events. What have I experienced? Did I realize that when I went hiking in the Great Falls last time, were my sneakers sinking into the pathway because it was muddy and it had previously rained? And then I'm thinking, oh, wow, this week it's been rainy. Maybe then I might have a similar experience. So I'm alluding and pulling back from my past experiences to determine whether or not I'm going to wear hiking boots versus sneakers when I go on a hike in the Great Falls. As we analyze the chain of events as behavior analysts, it is critical to begin to see the events through a determinism lens, and for us to focus on how the environment really plays a role in our decision making. So, as behavior analysts, we think about the environment and how it impacts what decisions we make and what MO it creates for us. With that concept, we are breaking down the concept, oh wow, that was just a random event. It had no input. As observers, we need to think about how determinism can help us measure and create measurable experiences for us to be able to change behaviors and or study it better in order to better support needs of individuals. But as scientists, we need to focus on what physical attributes and causes can impact what is being studied, and specifically in the scenario, behavior. As I read, I found myself considering the section on responsibility a lot. So as teachers, it's so easy for us to sit there and think, wow, you had a choice to make. You could have chosen to keep your hands to yourself, or you could have chosen to go and respond by hitting somebody. And I think that section really humbled me, and if you haven't read it yet, I would really, really take some time to dive into that part. It really just changed my perspective on how I view that lens. We hope that students will take responsibility of their behaviors and actions. Specifically, we think about problem behaviors. We're not always going to go and celebrate them deciding to make good choices, and I think that's also a different lens and a different side conversation for a different day. But as I read, they discussed the notion that if we think about behavior as being determined by external factors, then we think about behavior as not being in the person's control or the person's responsibility. And that really shook my mindset a little bit in terms of, as scientists, we think that the environment does play a role and that does change how behaviors are responding, which innately then is not allowing the person specifically to be responsible of that behavior. The book also discussed how although there are factors that influence our choice, we can't scientifically take on the control of our own behavior. However, from an environmental standpoint, we can't avoid the effects of our behavior on the environment. So if I'm deciding to make my environment toxic by throwing items and making others uncomfortable, that does have an influence to some regard. So through the principle of individuals are pushed to think about consequences before they make choices and act. For specific behaviors, it is important to build in contingencies to help motivate the desired responses. And so in the book, they talked about the example of curfews and why parents end up choosing to make curfews for their families. And oftentimes it comes back down to the internal motivation is not there. And so if a child is motivated to meet the curfew in order to keep privileges, then they will likely adapt their behavior to do so, versus a child who is not motivated by the options provided if they'll meet their curfew. So that then builds in the concept of reinforcement. What reinforcement really motivates a child and how individualized this all needs to be. Within our profession and in the ABA world, another word frequently used is choice. And I am a frequent offender of this. Although choice seems to be internally driven, it is not isolated from outside factors. So, for example, if I'm going to talk to my class before we go to the book fair and tell them about how amazing the newest Harry Potter book is and how they all need to read it and they are going to love it and it ties back into the movie, etc., etc. And then they hear their classmates talking about it. When they go into the book fair, they have all that external influence going in as they make that purchase. It's not always going to only be internalizing factors and individually driven. My excitement, their peers' excitement, social media's excitement, knowing the actors, actresses, the different pieces of all that is going to play a factor in their decision making. And I think oftentimes as educators, we think about it as this is a choice, it's black and white, and it's not. And for me, that was really grounding overall. Throughout the book, they emphasize the scenarios provided and provided an important different mental lens for me, and it made me really focus on what is the function of this behavior. Why is the child engaging in disruptive behaviors and or opting to not get involved in a lot of different activities that they might have been motivated to do otherwise. But I think as we move into the further chapters and further discussion, that's a lens I want to kind of keep focused. What is the function of this behavior? Why is the child engaging in disruptive behavior versus engaging in the activity provided? And I just kept thinking through my own perspective and what I've experienced. And just, for example, my class, I have a group of kids on the higher end of the spectrum who all hate going outside for recess. Let's think about the reasons. External factors. It can get loud. It can get rowdy. There's a lot of kids out there. It can be hot. They could feel excluded. They might not know how to socially navigate. Those are all different pieces of why they might refuse to leave the classroom during recess time and choose to sit in the classroom instead of walking out with the rest of the group. So that kind of what lingered with me as I read this chapter. Moving on, as I think about the discussion question that I think is meaningful is, can behavior be viewed as a response to preferred and non-preferred activities, and why? So is behavior driven by a choice versus is it free will or determinism, essentially? Thanks.